Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming up tonight for our June Board of Trustees meeting. Our first item on the agenda is the welcome prayer and the pledge. We will start with the prayer. Dr. Stiles, everybody please stand.
May we pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the opportunity to serve our children and our community tonight, and we thank you for their trust in us. Please do not let us take this role lightly and help us to continue to grow in our knowledge as trustees, that we may better serve our children and our community. We once again thank you for this period of rest for our students and our staff members. We ask that you place a shield of protection about them as they travel near and far to celebrate Independence Day with friends and family. As a board, we are also thankful that we can stand before you today, as our forefathers did in the early days of our nation's independence, to honor you for our freedoms, to celebrate our history, and to revel in all the great blessings that your provident hand has provided for our nation. We rejoice in your favor, and we thank you for the blessings of liberty that continue to flow from one generation to the next. Moreover, we thank you for the millions of Americans, past and present, whose military service has kept our nation safe and strong, and whose sacrifices have helped preserve the freedoms and independence we enjoy today. For these things, we praise your name. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Stiles. Tonight, I am very proud to introduce a very special set of twins to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. They are Ben and John Ballinger. Ben and John just completed their 6th year at Pelham Road Elementary School and will be entering Greenville Middle School as 6th graders this fall. Ben is known by his classmates as having the funniest personality, while John is known as being the most unique. Both of these young men love sports, playing soccer and football for the YMCA and basketball for their church, Travelers Rest Methodist. They are enjoying a summer full of playing video games, swimming, reading, and tubing in the river that runs through their neighborhood. Their future aspirations include John considering the military and engineering as a career, while Ben is looking forward to playing football in college and possibly the NFL. It is with great pleasure to ask my grandsons, John and Ben Ballinger, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Taught them well, Doctor.
Got them started.
Thank you, John and Ben.
Roger, what was that?
They got them started. Got it started.
That's all I told them to do.
Instructions, right? Follow instructions, wait.
That's my little princess going behind there.
Roger, you told them to exit quickly before they told on you for anything. Were they afraid
No,
you were going to do?
no, they said they were going to exit quickly, so. Okay, the next item on the agenda is adoption of the consent calendar. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is appearance of visitors. We have, I think, 4 visitors tonight. Dr. Stiles, would you like to read our process, please?
As each speaker's name is called, he or she should proceed to the podium at the end of the board dais where there is a microphone and light system. Each speaker has up to 3 minutes to speak to the board. The light system will be green for the first 2 minutes and will turn yellow when 1 minute remains on the speaker's allotted time. In keeping with board policy KCA, abusive language or personal attacks aimed at students or staff members will not be permitted. All speakers are expected to behave in an orderly and respectful manner. The board will not engage in discussion with the speaker or respond to comments. The superintendent will designate a member of the staff to respond to each speaker in an appropriate and timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stiles. Our first speaker is Jonathan Hausmann.
Great. Thank you very much. I said, my name's Jonathan Hausmann, and I'm here to discuss bullying. You've probably seen myself and my wife and my daughter Rebecca here several other times. Unfortunately, we're here to continue to fight against this phenomenon called bullying. As all of you know, bullying has been going on for a long, long time. Just several years ago in Greenville County School District, you've logged at least 400 to 500 different claims on bullying, and that's just what's claimed, not even all the different claims that aren't coming in from the children, or the continual abuse that some of these children are taking nowadays. This is tough to say, but years ago, we were on a walk with Becca, walking back, and she just absolutely broke down in crying and tears. Why is that? Because of bullying. Because of what she's experienced in the school, what happened there, the neglect, and what can I tell her? Guess what? It's gonna go away. No, it's not going to go away because there's neglect of bullying in the schools. Things aren't being done. The school needs to step up and do something about bullying. It continues to happen over and over again. I mean, what do you do? If you're at the school, you can't say anything, because if you try to say anything to one of the students, you'll be arrested, as it's happened to other parents. Today, parents are suing Greenville County School District more and more. Why is that? Because not enough things are going on with bullying. You've been sued for at least $10,000, or you're settling. Think of the legal fees you could save if you just addressed what's going on right now in your schools. Think about this. If a teacher is accused of something in your school, what happens? They're asked to probably take a leave. And during that leave, everything is investigated, resolved, until you come to a final conclusion about what actually happened. Why don't we take the same approach with something like bullying? I mean, why take the other student's name, or why not take this other student's story and not accept my daughter's story? But all you do is protect the other students, and you do not protect our daughter. I ask that you please address this. We appreciate everyone speaking to us and understanding that, hey, we're very sorry for what's going on. We want to help do something about it, and we appreciate that. We truly do. But actions speak louder than words. We expect everyone here on this board to act on this information. And if you can't act on the information, I would ask you to step down from your seat, and so that we can bring somebody in who has a passion that wants to make a difference and address bullying in the schools. Because it's happening more and more every day, and it's heartbreaking to see what's happened to our daughter and the impact it's had on her, and I can't imagine the impact it's had on numerous other children across Greenville County and other areas. I know you've launched See Something, Say Something. Did you really launch it, or did you just copy and paste it from Anderson County? Because that's where it started. We want somebody who's going to lead, not someone to follow. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Hausmann. Next speaker is Jennifer Hausmann.
To the Greenville County School Board. This is my third time speaking to you. I'm hoping that this time will be different. I'm here to talk to you about the facts of bullying. Did you know that 4,400 kids have been victims of bullying in our state of South Carolina? 4,400 kids have decided other ways to end their bullying. How many kids this is how many kids have committed suicide. That as a mom is high numbers for me of that many kids committing suicide. My daughter is a victim of bullying, and she has shown me how strong she is and how she's willing to stand up for herself. Bullying is a very important issue to me. We really need to change the way of how we treat bullying, make it better for the kids that are being bullied, instead of ignoring bullying. That button to report bullying, if you see something, say something, that's not how my situation is treated at all. When a student in class and teachers need to see it as well as hear it, well, if that was the case, then teachers would have shown how they've seen it, what happened to my child on the playground in 6th grade. So if you see something, hear something, that tells me it doesn't work. For my child who's being bullied as a mom, I want to know why. My calls for help have been ignored by the school, law enforcement, and everyone else. This is what needs to be changed. The laws need to be stronger in our state of South Carolina on bullying. I want that for my child or any other child that is a victim of bullying. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hausmann. Our next speaker is Stacy Sherman.
Hey, I'd like to go ahead and pass this down, please. I'm speaking, my son graduated, yay, recently from J.L. Mann High School. He was a Patriot. And I'm coming today because I was very disappointed in graduation. And I have a picture that was from graduation day. He had a stole that he was given by the Marines recruiting officer that said, and you have to bear with me because I'm such a proud mama, United States Marine Corps, and he has enlisted. He's heading out to boot camp next month. And our graduation ceremony never acknowledged the many students that were both men and women that had chosen to serve our country in all the different branches. There was never a moment of recognition for the Patriots. We skipped the national anthem at graduation, and he was told by one of the faculty to take the stole off, roll it up, and put it in his pocket. And so I wanted this school board to see what that stole looks like. I'm so proud of him. He went to the Donaldson Center, and so I'll plug that too. The Donaldson Airplane Mechanics Program was amazing. That's what he's going to be doing for our armed services, is working on the airplanes. And I just hope that changes. I understand this is a new policy that somehow the branches of the service got grouped into political organizations so that they were not allowed to display anything whatsoever. And I love that ROTC is in our schools. And I think if somebody makes that commitment to our country, and here they are in high school and they're signing that paperwork to fill out, their beneficiaries, if they don't die, if they don't come back. I mean, it's a big commitment. I would like to see it recognized, and I certainly would love to see the men and women that serve be able to wear a small, tasteful stole that says United States, either Marine Corps or Army or Coast Guard or Air Force. And I would like to see that change for future students by next year. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Sherman. On behalf,
Thank you.
next speaker is Sasha Patton.
Hello and good evening. My name is Sasha Patton. I'm the mother of a second grader and a future kindergartner. I've spent 14 years teaching in public schools and hold a master's degree in education. I'm here again to advocate for a child's biological need to move and play outdoors throughout the school day. With rare exception, our K-4 through 5th grade students get just 20 minutes of recess each day. Some 6th graders are lucky enough to get one short recess, and nearly all of our 7th and 8th graders get none. These are 11, 12, and 13-year-old children who absolutely need unstructured outdoor time to grow and be healthy. This is especially true for our low-income students who already lack opportunities to play. Every nation that outranks us gives kids substantial time for unstructured outdoor play every day. The CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the National Network of Public Health Institutes, and Harvard University, along with countless others, all agree. Recess improves memory, attention, and concentration. It helps on-task behavior in the classroom, reduces disruptive classroom behaviors, and improves social and emotional development. So what can we do? Number 1. Require schools to include 30 minutes of outdoor unstructured recess in their daily schedules. State Board of Ed Regulation 43-231 requires 1,800 minutes of instruction time each week, or 6 hours a day. That leaves The school day is 6.5 hours long, leaving 30 minutes available for recess. And number 2, discontinue the use of screen time when indoor recess is necessary. Games on Chromebooks are not a substitute for recess and should not be permitted. Since I began this work in February, I've been in contact with the State Board of Ed, spoken face-to-face with 2 lawmakers, met with members of this board, reached out to multiple folks in Greenville County schools, attended district-level parent meetings, and worked directly with the staff at my child's school to brainstorm solutions. Local nonprofits, Live Well Greenville, and public education partners have continued to offer positive input. I've heard from countless families, each of them gravely concerned about the long-term effects that come with a sedentary childhood. Fortunately, the answers are simple. It may take some consistent effort, but I, for one, am here for it. Next month, I will be addressing the Greenville County Democratic Party at their monthly luncheon, ensuring this conversation will grow to the state level. Meeting this need for our children is free. No additional budget is required. Thank you all for your time this evening. Enjoy your break next month, and I'll see you back here in August.
Thank you, Ms. Patton. Our next speaker is Michael Joy.
Thank you. Reminder, last time I brought, there's an open motion on the floor to recreate our strategic goals and our supporting strategy. I don't know if I'm able to do that, but I'm doing it, and we the people are really the ones in power. So the reason I bring that up is because it's so important. Everything grows out of our strategy. Everything grows out of our goals. When we set good goals and we hit them, there's no end to what we can accomplish. Creating a good strategy starts with the is condition. Unfortunately, the is condition is that U.S. News has us dead last in the nation for education. All right, that's not a good place to begin, but the good news is there's no place but up to go. You have the is condition, the truthful understanding of where we are today, and then we create a vision of where we want to be. And I guess I'm thinking that some of the things that we'd want to have in there from a student's perspective, I'd like to see us create lifetime learners. I'd like to see it based in morality, which addresses bullying, healthy pride and confidence. I'd like to see us create independent and critical thinkers with research skills for self-learning. They have to learn how to learn what they don't already know. And then the ability to freely discuss opposing perspectives, to be able to debate. It's a lost art that we can actually have a discussion when 2 people disagree. It becomes, something we can do better at. After knowing the is condition and the ought condition, where we want to be, it's just a plan to close the gap. And it's hard work, sure, right? And I know that there's already a strategy in place, but I would remind where we are and where we want to be, right? Will that strategy move us? I haven't seen it yet, but I guess I don't have confidence. After we create that plan, we got to communicate it to all the stakeholders. And I'm thinking this group should be included in those stakeholders, from the board to the teachers to the students, everybody, so that everybody knows how they can participate and add value to that. Included should be a measurement system, right? We have to know whether we're on track to those goals or not. And as soon as we know that we're not, we have to adjust, and we got to build in that capability. Some of the things that we might measure: students and teachers. Are they challenged? Do they need support? Are they having fun learning? Are they having fun teaching? Right? Are they growing in a healthy school pride? Are they on the road to be their best? Right? Those are things that we should address. In the end, we got to check the scoreboard, right? In sports, we use a scoreboard. We know where we're at. I don't think this is a secret, but we got to fix it, and the time to make good change is now. It begins with truth. It harnesses the people, and then it deploys out to the people. There's a lot of passion in this room. Let's harness it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joy. Before we go to the next item, I had forgot to thank Mrs. Bush for the flowers tonight, which I usually forget. I'm old, sorry. Thank you again. Next item on the agenda is 4.01, Superintendent's Report.
Hey, Mr. Meek. Tonight, as a superintendent's report, I simply want to make some introductions based on the action of the board earlier approving personnel, and then I'll have a number of comments later as we deal with the recommended amendment to the general fund budget. But I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the newly appointed personnel that are with us tonight. Julius Burns, who's the newly appointed Assistant Director at Lifelong Learning. Julius, congratulations. Welcome. I don't know if you have any family with you or not, or Mr. Delaney, your family here tonight. The next introduction, Marcia Braga, the newly appointed assistant principal at Pelham Road Elementary. Marcia, congratulations. Welcome. Do you have anyone with you tonight? Very good. Congratulations to you as well. Danielle Lee, who was appointed principal at Duncan Chapel Elementary, actually a special called earlier, but Danielle, glad to have you here tonight so people can get an opportunity to see you and meet you. And congratulations. We look forward to having you in that leadership role, moving the role there as assistant principal to the principalship. And I believe you may have some folks with you tonight as well. Great. Welcome to each of you. Carmen Jones, Assistant Principal, Taylor's Elementary. Carmen, congratulations to you. We look forward to having you in that new role. You have someone with you tonight as well? Howard, welcome. Susan King, AP Hollis Elementary. Susan, congratulations to you on your new role, and welcome to that leadership position. You have someone with you tonight as well? Jeremy, welcome to you as well. Congratulations. And I believe we did introduce him, and many of you already knew him, but since this is his first board meeting in his new role, Dr. George Ward, who was appointed Associate Superintendent for Operations. Dr. Ward has assumed the Mr. Davies' corner seat over there tonight. So. Thank you, Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Next item on the agenda is 5.01. The recommended motion coming from the Committee of the Whole does not need a second, is to approve a utility easement as requested by Duke Energy Carolinas LLC at Dr. Finney J. Fisher Middle Schools. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, 5.02, the recommended motion coming from the Committee of the Whole does not need a second, is to approve a utility easement as requested by Duke Energy Carolinas LLC at Roper Mountain Science Center. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, 5.03, the recommended motion coming from the Committee of the Whole is to select firms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to provide architectural services for multi-term small projects throughout the district for the next 5 years. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The motion carries. The firms listed is Ardwood, Holcomb, and Slate Incorporated, McMillan, Paston, Smith, and Architecture, Little Diversified Architectural Consulting, Inc., LS3P, DLR Group, SGA/NW, doing business as SGA/NW, a GF design company. Next item on the agenda, 5.04, recommended motion coming from the administration is to amend the fiscal year 23 general fund budget as presented. I will need a motion to put this on the floor.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sailors.
I move to amend the fiscal year 2023 general fund budget as presented.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion concerning this amendment? Or do you want to say something, Dr. Oyster?
Yes, sir. I have a presentation, actually.
Well, let's do it then.
Don't want to belabor it, but I think some background would be in order. Take Ms. Fitzer just a minute to get over there and pull it up on the screen. Well, as she does that, this has been a most unusual budget year. I've done or been a part of doing district level budgets for now 23 years. And it is the most unusual year that we've had in those 23. A lot of that has to do with the almost overnight announcement and proposal to revamp the funding methodology for public schools in the state. And we've discussed that a little bit during the course of the spring. But I want to review that a little bit tonight and talk about how we ended up where we are in looking at an additional $10 million in state general fund revenue. Doug. All right, the FY23 state appropriations, there's a total increase in state aid to classrooms and teacher pay of $273,505,435. All of that funding running through the new formula. There's $173,700,000 in general fund revenue and $99,805,435 in EIA acts, EIA Act revenue. Now that totals the 273. $457.8 million of existing EIA lines were rolled up into the state aid to classrooms line. Again, this is all state revenue. $557.7 million. Those lines include aid to districts, EIA teacher salaries, students at risk of school failure, EIA employer contributions, and South Carolina public charter schools. What you'll see now is a comparison between the old EFA, which was the primary funding source at the state level for school district revenue since 1977, and the new formula and its application that came into being in this year, and what happened at the conclusion of the legislative session. Prior to that, there was a House version and a Senate version. At the end of the session, the two were merged using the House dollar figure, which was higher, but taking the weightings from the Senate version, which were more numerous and higher. So we ended up with a blended change different from the one first described in the early spring, which accounts for some of the change in revenue. All right, so we're moving from a base student cost to state aid to classrooms. Based on a series of weightings for student needs to determine how much money the state provides, to a system based on a predetermined student-teacher ratio and an average teacher salary to determine the state share. A state versus local share in EFA is 70-30 to a 75-25 share. No local match required for EIA funds received in the old EFA. Districts must now match. Contains differentiated weights for student special needs. Old EFA. Lumps all special needs students together in a 2.6 weighting. New. Weightings determine state funded needing. The weightings now determine what percent of state aid to classrooms a district will receive. Here are the EFA weightings. K-12 students were a 1, pre-career and career tech a 1.29, RTF's a 2.1. K-12 students in the new base was a 1, pre-career and career tech's now a 1.2. RTF students are a 2.1. The former EFA weightings for students with disabilities range from 1.74 to 2.57. They're now all a flat 2.6. EFA add-on weightings, in other words, a student was a 1. If they were a GT student, they became a 1.15. You see the ones to the left, 0.15, academic assistance 0.15, limited English proficiency 0.2, pupils in poverty 0.2, dual enrollment 0.15. The new add-on weightings, gifted and talented 0.15, stayed the same, academic assistance stayed the same, limited English proficiency stayed the same. Pupils in poverty goes from 0.2 to 0.5. Charter school students get a 1.25 as their brick and mortar and a 0.65 they're virtual. All right, the determination of state effort requirement. Here's the new base formula. Determine the desired student-to-teacher ratio. And you recall, that's just teachers and some other professional employees, doesn't include teacher aides. It's 11.2 to 1 for FY23. Then the state takes the cost of a teacher, the state average. Now it says FY23, but it's the preceding year's average because they don't yet know the average salary for FY23. It's the FY22 salary of $69,153. That's the state's average salary and fringe. Ours is over $80,000 per teacher. Average daily membership divided by the student ratio determines the number of classrooms the state will fund. Further explained, the state ADM, the state total of students, 752,928 divided by 11.2 equals 67,223, generating that number of classrooms. Determine the state share, you multiply the cost of the teacher by the number of classrooms, 4.7, right at $4.7 billion, for which the state supports 75%. That's the new basis. So all of that changed. We went over that earlier during the budget process. And again, as a reminder, what happened during the end of the budget process, the House version had more money in it, lower weightings. The Senate version had less money, higher weightings. The compromise they reached took some of the weightings from the Senate side and the dollar amount from the House version and ended up netting to us $10 million in additional state revenue. If it had been obviously a much smaller amount, we would have waited and done this in August. But this is a considerable amount, though it's not necessarily material in a $790 million budget. We do believe it is significant. And it would help us to meet some needs we already have identified. As we go back to the budget that you all approved, it did include a tax increase, but you all will recall this is a reassessment year. So that tax increase actually had the effect of reducing the reduction in taxes. Reassessment caused the tax rate to go down 7.6 mils. You all approved adding 4.5 back to it, which means there is an add back of 3% to the 5% decrease. So your 3.1 mil increase, which generates over $7 million, is actually a 2% overall decrease in property tax. There's a good illustrated example of on a car. The 21 tax, $28.75, $28.65, the 22 tax, $25.78. The 23 tax would be $25.26. As a reminder, that 23 tax is actually a tax up till January. If your tags are renewed after December, it will drop further because they establish a new vehicle value rate in December, which cannot be more than 95% of the previous year's value. So that further decreases that example. So who will pay additional taxes? If you bought a newer car, or for example, if you own 2 cars and you bought a third. If you bought a second home or own a second home, not a primary home, not a rental, but a second home. Got a house up in the mountains. You live down in Simpsonville, you have a house in the mountains. Who may pay additional taxes in a business and industry? Well, for property, if you have a building and you buy a second one, you're going to pay more taxes. If you have 2 delivery trucks and you buy a third, you're going to pay taxes because you got 3 trucks where you previously had 2. If you replace equipment, i.e. older piece of equipment, buy a newer piece. Had an old tractor, bought a newer one. Now, if you follow, depending on the depreciation schedule you follow, you can immediately depreciate that to 10% of the value at purchase, which I believe hits the floor of that old piece of equipment. That's the least it can be valued. So you may or may not pay any taxes depending on how you and your accountant choose to depreciate your property and equipment. So that kind of sets the stage. We got 10 million additional in revenue. You all had approved a budget, had a good number of very significant items in it, most directly related to ensure that we provide a competitive wage for our teachers and recognize through additional compensation the value of all of our employees to our goal of increasing student achievement and success. And as you recall, the primary feature of that is you approved a $2,000 per step on the salary schedule increase for all of our teachers. And obviously they also get a step. And for those at the end of our schedule, you added a step to ensure they got a step. We now have 33 steps on our teacher salary schedule. We are paying in some cases on the far end of our teacher salary schedule, 6 to 7, I think now even maybe $8,000 or more dollars higher than many of our surrounding districts. And we still have one of the highest starting salaries for teachers, having moved with your action of $2,000 from $42,500 to $44,500. This provides us an opportunity to become even more competitive. And I think it's particularly important, just anecdotally, it's my understanding that last night Beaufort County approved a starting salary in excess of $45,000 for their beginning teachers. So even more important for us to continue to maintain our position of competitiveness in the marketplace. So you all approved a 2,000 increase. So we're recommending and requesting that you take a portion, $3.36 million of this $10 million, and add $500 to that 2,000 increase to every cell on the schedule. That would move our starting pay to just over $45,000. I believe it's $45,060, something like that, a stat. But just over $45,000. That's 3.36 million of the 10. You all addressed internal inequities with our principal salary schedules. In other words, every year we've not been able to grant step increases to non-teaching employees. That created a great internal inequity and external inequity with our principals, because principals who are already here didn't move a step every year. When we had to hire principals coming from the outside, if that was the best qualified person, we could have a principal coming in with 6 years experience making a step 6 salary, and have a principal internally with 6 years experience making a step 3 salary. You all approved closing that gap, eliminating it, to the tune of a little over $800,000. It was a principal group, small group of employees. All right, so this segment, this $3.34 million, we would recommend and request that it be applied to addressing internal inequities in all the other pay schedules. And you have in your board docs a list of those. And basically, it's all the other positions in the school district that aren't paid on the teacher salary schedule. Now, there are some that the $15 an hour minimum took care of that issue with those employee groups. But it generally applies to all other categories of employees. There's not sufficient amount in here because we believe primarily of importance is funding some additional compensation for teachers. There's not enough to fully address this as you all did with the principals. But we propose to do this in a process, and you have that in your board docs, where if you are off by 1 step, you get no adjustment. If you're off 2 to 3 steps, you get adjusted by 1 step. If you're off 4 to 5 steps, you get adjusted by 2 steps. So basically between half or a little bit less than half of the distance. So helping to close the distance between where you should be, if you equate those to years of experience, and where you actually are, to help address that internal inequity, and also to help us with being able to competitively employ from the outside. Because the other thing we consider in employment from the outside is not creating too great a distance between a new employee and existing employees. So that tempers our offer to external candidates. So this helps to recruit and secure external candidates for many of our jobs coming from outside with the nature of the positions. Just as a note, the missteps will be calculated for the employee's initial year of placement in their current grade. The grade is the line they're on. The steps are the numbers to the right of that line. And lastly, this is simply an illustration here, as I mentioned to you, of how those steps would be calculated. Again, basically getting them halfway to where they should be. And then we would ask and recommend that the remaining $3.3 million be used to further reduce reliance on the general fund balance. As you all know, you approved utilization of fund balance last budget year, the fiscal year we're concluding this week, in order to avoid a tax increase in that year. But it, as you know, and we've discussed many times, we need to show that we are reducing our reliance on that. If not, it will affect our ratings, which relate to how much we have to pay when we issue bonds for school construction. And we're talking about capital projects, capital budget later this evening. But that can have an adverse effect. Having a planned utilization of fund balance and a planned reduction of reliance on it down to zero, and a firm timeline for that reduction does not negatively affect credit ratings, but it is essential to back down that reliance. And it also shows good faith to our rating agencies if we're able to accelerate that. This would allow us to accelerate it to the tune of 3.3 applied to the amount we're applying this year to reducing that. So currently we're using $16.6 million. So you see the 5-year step down is $4.15 million per year. If you approve this recommendation of 3.3, that changes That's simply another reminder. We'll come back to that in a minute. That changes the step down to 13.3, making the annual step down to get to zero by FY29, 3.325 million. This will likely help you to avoid a larger millage increase at some point down the road, because you've got to get off the dependence of fund balance. And it won't all happen through natural growth, likely. But the more you can do earlier, the better position it places the district in financially. And this is simply a reminder, we're getting an indirect cost amount of $33.2 million in the general fund because we have ESSER funds. And the indirect cost calculation on ESSER funds is far larger than any other federal program. And the cliff for that is FY25. We cannot count that as a revenue stream in FY26. So you have our recommendation. I certainly need to credit Sandy Smith, South Carolina Association of School Business Officials, because we borrowed many of her slides. Many of you know Sandy. She's an expert in school finance, works both with South Carolina School Business Officials Association and South Carolina Association of School Administrators. So certainly, Mr. Mickey, any questions that the board might have, any further information that we might provide, I'd be glad to do so.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. We have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? Ms. Wells? Sure.
So I guess the first question, Dr. Royster, is does this need to be approved today? So now that we know the amount, does this 10 million need to be allocated and spent tonight versus doing it in August or in July? We have a special meeting in July.
For a couple of reasons. One, it takes a significant amount of work to get the payroll done to move these people. At best, we're looking at being able to do it by the end of this pay period, the first pay period in July, but more likely the end pay period in July. And that's for the 245-day employees. The others probably in August. We want to immediately, if we're able to increase teacher pay, we want to immediately be advertising that to potential employees. That's as critical as anything. We would prefer not to be in this situation. We prefer to have had this information far earlier on. But any delay to it detracts to a degree, from its utilization in recruitment of employees, may to a degree detract to our ability to retain current employees. Because part of this having to do with catching people up on steps, I think goes directly to retention of current employees.
Well, and I think that is an important piece, and it seems like there's a lot going on here with salary inequities, and you're saying we're trying to address them stepwise fashion. It's still confusing. We used to, when I first got on the board, we talked about COLA, a cost of living adjustment, and a step increase. And it seems like, over time, we've just those have kind of mixed and melded together, and now we'll say a step increase or at least 3% or 4% or whatever that looks like. So, and that, that's across the board. So when you start talking about these inequities that are happening as we're trying to recruit people from the business world who come in with 10 years of experience, where do they fall in the step? And then you're talking, so I guess for me, I wonder why we wouldn't take a larger amount of this money to make appropriate adjustments. I mean, you used in the question that I had asked previously about the budget, when I asked about the percent salary increases by job category, and the response was we were operating off of a salary schedule construct that has been in place for more than 20 years, and kind of how it's detailed. So to me, it seems like if we had money, we had an opportunity to address that holistically instead of piecemeal fashion, and this money would help us do that. It would take care of a lot of issues
I would certainly agree with that. By our estimation, it might take as much as the entire $10 million to completely fix it. And we believe it's extremely important to further our teacher pay because we have this opportunity to do that. So we think that $500 addition to the sales there is extremely important. We do think it's important to show that we're making progress to remedying those other inequities. We certainly could defer the $3 million reduction on reliance to fund balance and use it down the road to address employee inequities other than teachers. But we also believe it would be important to try to get off of that because we don't know what kind of fiscal environment we're about to enter into in the next several years. So I think it's important. We viewed this as just an opportunity to do three things, basically using a third of the additional revenue to do so. Our long-term plan is to revamp those salary schedules, to do away with this issue. And I've been in the district 17 years, and there's never been a run of years where we did steps for other employees beside teachers. So it was not a great system to begin with. And when we've talked to the people that are working with salary studies with us, they think it's a good system, but they say you have to do it every year. Well, and it's got the unequal steps. So what we're probably looking towards is developing some alternatives, which might include a banded system like 0 to 3 years. Then when you hit year 4, you automatically move to the next category, which we could budget. Depending on how many years you included in a band, you could budget for a third or a fourth of employees to get that move every year. But the closer we can get people to where they're supposed to be, the easier and the less costly it is to transfer to a different system of compensation for them. So we view this as a step in that direction to help set a base that will allow us to more easily convert to a different compensation system.
Well, and I guess it seems to me with the labor market being what it is and the pressure from that it's not going to get any easier to put people in better positions. I mean, you had one of the ranges, you have where you're transitioning some technicians to a different annual support schedule, or to a two-step schedule from an annual.
Right.
You got one increase in salary of 30% and another at 3.8. I mean, that's a huge disparity. And when you're talking about people who could be working in industry instead of here, I guess it just seems to me like that's a really critical piece and is going to get worse as industry is coming into our ranks and taking our teachers, our support staff, and the rest. So,
well, and for many of the more technical positions, we're probably going to move to a 1 or 2 step wage for them. We have for years had really a 2-wage schedule for maintenance trades workers, and that's worked very well for us. But for some positions, they need, particularly long-term, where they may be in a job for a period of time, they need some opportunity for growth. So we're looking at what would be a better, more balanced compensation system that would allow for some movement each year for at least some group of employees, in addition to a COLA.
So is this salary study, well, we've been working on this for a while, are you going at it, are you working with these folks just in categories of staff?
We've had them examine all of our salaries externally. They identified the same thing we did. We have internal inequities. Well, we already knew that. Well, they confirmed that. Again, this is a system that they would recommend. Not that it would be the sole system they'd recommend, but their key to it is you got to move them every year. There are 2 philosophies about salary schedules that are constructed like this one. This one has higher steps on the beginning. There are also people that put lower steps on the beginning and put the higher steps on the end. We believe we'd be better served with equal movement. But we want to see what other districts have, what other places are doing as far as compensation. We actually already have people that have contacted us about the single wage categories we're using because they're looking to get out of a multi-wage system, other school districts.
You would do that even for categories where you need an increasing level of competency? that you would keep?
Well, for example, the maintenance, which is kind of a good example, there are some categories there that require greater technical knowledge than others. An HVAC controls technician requires far greater technical knowledge than a carpenter. So that wage is higher than a carpenter wage.
Well, I guess that was my first question related to, do we have to approve this now? It's really just because it seems like we've struggled with bus drivers for years. We know that. We've made strides in that, but we're still don't have what we need. Now we're seeing the same thing when it comes to HVAC techs and all those folks. So I guess we all know you can't make this. We have to have teachers, and the students show up for teachers, but the teachers need all that support to do their job. So,
which again is part of the reason behind giving a balanced recommendation for using this. Part of it going to our support and leadership personnel, and part of it going to teaching personnel.
And is this a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year correction plan? What do you? Because you said you're doing it. You're talking about doing it over time.
Well, quite honestly, depends on what the climate looks like for state revenue every year. Well, that's the reason we had no recommendation for it this year, because we didn't believe there was room in the state revenue, nor with what we thought would be a reasonable millage request to do that this year.
So I guess then if we think about the additional monies going to teacher salaries, the question I had there, we've talked about this in years past, but I haven't heard it come up recently. Was there any discussion of taking that money and trying to target it towards Title I teachers or positions that we know we're having difficulty in filling if you're going to go work in a school?
No, we've talked about targeting Title I funds for Title I schools, but not to use this because there's such competition for teachers no matter what the location. We want to try to get our teacher salary as high as we can reasonably get it, and continue to be a leader in the state in teacher pay.
I think that was it. Thank you, Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Ms. Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Meek. Dr. Royster, to piggyback off of what you just said, where are we in the teacher rank right now? I know what we were heading into this budget season.
We are currently number 2 in beginning teacher pay, number 3 in average, Stephanie, and we're number 1 in most experienced, I believe is our, double check the second one for me.
2 in average, 1 in max, and 1 in minimum.
Okay,
So beginning pay, we're number 1, maximum pay, we're number 1, and we're number 2 in average.
okay, so is that, I'm understanding that Beaufort gave a big raise last night or yesterday. So is that before that or?
Well, that's this year, the year we're still sitting in, okay. FY22.
Okay.
Based on what we heard from other districts who would respond either directly to finances inquiries or some that I contacted directly, generally going into our budget approval, $2,000 was the flat raise that most people were doing. Some of them were doing less. I think Anderson 5 was proposing doing like 5,000, but it didn't take them beyond what 2,000 would have taken us. But their 5,000 wouldn't have gotten them where 2,000 added to ours got us. So going into it, pretty well positioned. Based on what happened last night, even with this change, as I understood it, and it was a little convoluted the way it was reported. I'm not saying the reporting was convoluted, but when they explained it, and I'll kind of elaborate on that in just a second, it could move them for starting teacher pay to 45.5, which even with this change would make us second. But their steps stop at 23, I believe. So more experienced teachers, we would have way the upper hand there. For a number of years, Beaufort's done some sort of local subsidy for housing because of the high cost of housing in some parts of Beaufort County, and every teacher didn't get it. And the way I read the thing, they were going to take some of that and now divide it amongst all the teachers. And somehow that got them to 45.5, but the way it read, it was as if some of it was, for lack of a better term, temporary. It was very confusing. We hadn't had an opportunity to talk to anybody in there and see exactly what they're doing. But it just puts a little more pressure on us if we want to stay at the top to continue. We've got an opportunity now to add to it, add some more to it.
So with this proposal tonight, what is that? Please remind me, what does that make our starting?
That would make it would move our starting teachers to
45,075.
slightly over 45,000. And there's a reason it's $75. It has to do with how they calculate things.
So that's just under Beaufort.
Which would be just under them. We still retain, I believe, we retain the advantage in average pay and certainly the advantage in experience pay. Anecdotally, because we don't have right now a good way to track this, and we need to look at how we can track it, and how we encourage more of it. One of our executive staff was talking to a teacher at one of the schools who'd been there about 20-something years, and that individual teacher had recruited 2 other teachers with 20-something years experience from one of our neighboring districts because of the tremendous increase in pay they would experience coming from there to here. And our retirement system is based on the average 3 highest years. So it's a tremendous recruitment tool that we quite honestly need to take better advantage of. But I know that a number of our principals individually have, and at least in this one case, one of our teachers has in recruiting some teachers for us.
Okay, so if we didn't do that additional 500, do we still stay? I mean, we're still in
I
second.
think we still would be in the top 10. What we don't know is who else got additional state funding at the end of the legislative year, just like we found out this past week, toward the mid part of the week, end of the week, how much we got. So we don't know if somebody else is planning to do what we came in here and are doing tonight. What we do know is what Beaufort did.
Okay, and my second and last question has to do with general fund. And I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on this, I'm still learning. However, I understand that we cannot, that our goal is to get to fiscal year 29 with a 0. Is
Yes.
there any advantage to doing the opposite of what Lisa was saying, where she was wanting to put it more towards the inequities? I'm wondering if there's any advantage to put it all towards general fund to get us there. I mean, just from a recurring, since it's not ideal to take, to be recurring.
You know, you can argue it either way. You know, you could basically drop it to, you put the whole 10 million in there and now you only got 6. But we miss an opportunity to deal with some recruitment and retention issues. Obviously, we want to minimize it. That's why we kind of recommended this. We felt like this balanced approach put significant amount to teacher pay, put a significant amount to trying to close these gaps, and then put a significant amount towards reducing reliance on fund balance. The smaller you can make that number over time, the more manageable it becomes. But we believe in this case that it's better to apply it to the 3 uses as opposed to just 2 or just to 1. And that's just simply what we believe a balanced approach is a better approach to it. I think that's a reasonably conservative approach to it.
Okay, that's all I have right now, Mr. Meek. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Mr. Sailors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Mosley asked a couple of my questions, but let me ask you just for clarification. Our current budget, we identify that it costs X dollars to educate a child. Do you have any idea what that number is? Our per pupil cost?
Our 22 budget.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Stack.
$9,365 per pupil.
Okay. Is that just instruction related, or does that include food service, transportation?
That's general fund, based on general fund.
Okay. So in the 23 budget, even including this newfound $10 million, what will our costs, what are we getting from the state? In other words, we're paying X. What's the state giving us in this budget, including the new 10 million?
Oh, the total amount of state revenue in this budget?
If we had to identify per pupil revenue would be what? Any idea?
If you use the state
Yeah.
in the FY '23 budget,
Yes, ma'am.
it's $6,895 per pupil.
And that's using the state's projected ADM for us.
That,
But my
Weighted.
point being is there's a significant spread between the two.
Mhm.
And do we have any idea what that dollar figure, the differential is? Granted, you're talking 22 money and 23 money, but we'd have no way of identifying half of that equation, so.
The differential, the increase?
You know, in other words, how much money are we having to cover from what the state's supposed to be giving us versus what our expenses are?
There's not really a good way to answer it because we'd have to go back and identify everything that's a state mandate. And one of the changes, I didn't put it in here, you may recall it from the workshop in the first reading. One of the changes was, here's the money, but we're not requiring you to do anything except move teachers a step.
Right, and the way they've restructured the funding formula anyway also makes it a little hard to answer that question.
It does, and if you make the assumption, going back to a piece of information I shared earlier, their teacher cost isn't our teacher cost. Our teacher costs over 80,000, salary and fringe. States is 69, right at 69,000.
We mentioned earlier, I think, in answering Mrs. Wells' questions, that we reflected on inadequacies in the system, and your plan is, this is the first step, if I may take license with it, this is the first step of a multi-step process to try to balance that out over a period of time.
Yes, sir, and I think the balance, if we can get it close to balanced out, that's the time to convert to a different system.
That's fine, okay. So when you look at inadequacies, outside of HVAC technicians and information technology staff, the ones that would be considered high-end or high-pay, technically driven knowledge positions, whether they're in operations, food service, instruction, are we seeing a rather noticeable departure of current staff to other districts or other professions?
We're seeing
are not here.
an up in people leaving us for private sector, and we're having a difficult time attracting people in. And it's really that's really across almost all job categories. There is the highly technical. We probably HVAC controls tech is not a good example. I'm not sure we have a hard time finding those people. We traditionally haven't. But there are other positions in facilities we have trouble attracting people to. Project managers, some of the people in technical people in maintenance, budget analyst. You all have 3 openings in finance right now. 4 openings in finance. Several of them for several months. In fact, it really lengthened the time it took us to do these calculations because of being short-staffed.
Okay, well then let me ask you this. I know that we go out and physically recruit for instructional staff.
Mm-hmm.
Do we go out and recruit for professional services on the business side of the house as well?
We don't do recruitment events. We probably do more online. Now, we do recruitment events for classified employees, and you see those advertised all the time, job fairs. But, Ms. Clements, we've had some jobs open, and you all have advertised them. Indeed, where kind of a summary of that?
Yes, sir. We have done some additional advertising of those positions, Indeed being one of those where we have sponsored certain positions to try to increase the views of the applicants and increase the applicant pool for those positions. So we have done some additional advertising for those roles.
Okay, thank you. When we have a recruiting event, or how much money, let me go better, how much money did we spend this last year in rough terms on recruiting? Going out and recruiting teachers.
Ms. Clements, you or Ms. Stack?
Rough idea, I don't need an exact number, kind of a last minute question.
I can answer the question of the district's budget for recruiting.
Okay,
If
that's
that
close
would,
enough.
yes, sir. The district has a recruitment budget for all positions of $144,767. So that's teachers and all other positions within the district. And this, of course, would cover going out, speaking to, doing presentations, mileage, registration, transportation, et cetera.
Okay.
I believe you all approved an additional $46,000 for the coming fiscal year, primarily aimed at classified recruitment.
Yeah, okay. Well, my point being is this, the reason I ask these questions is we can all readily admit that there are reasons that are solid that we need to be giving all of our employees a more competitive wage. Goes without saying.
Yes, sir.
Are there corrections in the process that need to be made? Absolutely. But we're in a better position now at a process point than we were years ago.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so quite frankly, I think the recommendation is well thought through, considering the fact that it was unexpected money. From a tax standpoint, I appreciate the fact that you want to put a portion of it back into the general fund balance, because that also helps us with our bond rating, which also gets us the ability to get money cheaper if we need to secure outside sources. So, I appreciate your taking the time to put all this together. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sailors. Ms. Leventis Wells.
Dr. Royster, we talked about Beaufort, and I've received a number of calls from the Low Country on how they have gotten the salaries up for their teachers, et cetera. Can you just tell me that process again? Because I've actually listened to some teachers that have experience who are teaching in that Charleston area, that if they have 19 years experience and they go to Beaufort, they will end up with a $10,000 raise. And that is significant. So can you just explain that so I can know how competitive we are and how Beaufort pulled this off?
Well, I don't know that I understand well enough exactly what they did. I just read the report. They just took this action last night, so I just read the reports today.
Yes, sir.
That's going to be comparable. Your example of Charleston going to Beaufort, that's very comparable. I mentioned earlier we had a teacher share with, I think it was shared with Ms. Gibbs earlier this week, that she'd recruited a couple of other teachers from, I'll not tell you that, I'll not name it here the district.
Well, I hate that.
I don't really want them to know we're stealing their teachers, but because in some cases it's a better than $7,000 raise. I don't think there's nowhere in this state you're going to go with a doctorate and 33 years experience and make what you'd make here, because it's $96,000 a year. So that's a huge increase, because we've recommended, you all have approved, every time we've done teacher pay, we've done it up the schedule. We've not left people off because they had more years of experience.
Right.
So you have these tremendous disparities that can occur between and among districts. Charleston has always spent far more money per pupil than Greenville County, far more. If you look at their total general fund budget and our total general fund budget and their student population and ours, their student population is 48,000, Nancy, something like that. Ours is approaching 77,000. And I don't have their total general fund amount right now, but it is disproportionately far higher than ours. One thing that you do experience in Charleston County, we experience it in Beaufort County, maybe to a degree in Berkeley, but not so much there, and certainly in Horry County, there are huge amounts of 6% property there. because there are all these second homes and rental property that's bringing in income that we're not bringing in our millage calculations in Greenville County. You know, we got some industrial development that they don't have in those counties, but there's tremendous value if you have a large number of homes that are actually on the tax books and they're at 6%. And obviously owner occupied are not on the tax books anywhere for school operating purposes.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm going to agree with Mr. Sailors. I know that a lot of thought went into this. I think that we have to be very careful in not using reoccurring funds, because once we put money to take care of a situation this year, next year it's going to cost us double. And that's not a good way to do business, and that's not the way you've done business for us. And you've kept us in line as we have progressed over the years. With the economy going in the direction it is, there have been many of us that were here when it was a doom and gloom situation and worried about teachers and staff being riffed and so forth, and we never did that. We never did that, whereas other districts did. And I think it's because we look at the big picture and we make sure that we don't overextend and that we prepare for the unexpected. I appreciate that we did do everything we could for our teachers because they so deserve it, but I also appreciate that we did for all district employees because they deserve it equally as well. I'm hoping that the governor will follow through with putting an SRO in every school, and because the safety of our children is of great importance. So with that being said, I don't want to take any money out of the fund balance that you have not recommended. I think that we stick with the recommendations that you have given us, and I appreciate that your staff has worked diligently to bring us these numbers and this information so it gives us a better idea of what we're doing. So with that being said, Dr. Royster, I appreciate your vision and always looking ahead and taking the element of surprise to its peak and understanding. Is there anything else that you would see or feel that we should do?
No, I think, our recommendation is based on the information we have at this point, where we believe it would best be invested. Because, anytime you all are spending money, you're investing it. And we see that, 2/3 of this investment is in our people. And basically a third of it is in our fiscal responsibility. And I think that's a good balanced approach to it. And, everything we do is for people, it's with people, and it's by people. And it's most important that we recognize that and we continue to compensate them in an appropriate manner. And, it'd be nice if it could be an amount larger than this. I think certainly teachers are deserving of that, and our other employees are, as you pointed out. And I'll also point out that every time we talk with the teacher group and we get their input, the teacher forum about budget every year, and they have always, as a group, said, "Yeah, we need more money. We need a pay increase." Not saying that selfishly, but they have never, without exception, every year, they have said all employees deserve a pay raise, and I certainly think that's commendable on their part.
I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis Wells. Mr. Suddeth.
Dr. Royster, just from my understanding, the $3.30 million to further reduce the reliance on the general fund, what budget is that going into?
It simply removes as a revenue stream $3.3 million of your fund balance that you put in the general fund budget. You currently have 16.6 shown as revenue to the general fund budget.
Yes, sir.
It'll take that amount to 13.3, and it will return that to undesignated fund balance.
That's fine, thank you.
Yes, sir.
What about the internal salary inequities? What particular categories are involved in that? I know it can't be principals, can it, or teachers?
No, sir, it is neither principals nor teachers. It is literally everyone else, except there's some categories that when you all approved the $15 an hour minimum, it took care of the move that they would have made. For example, it removed one whole grade of pay. So they went to the next grade up. It removed their need to be moved for equity.
Are these the people that are on hourly pay?
Some of them are, yes, sir. There is a list in the board documents. I guess you're going to have to go online to see that. I don't have it printed. Don't we have the list of all the positions in the board documents?
Refresh, it'll be on there.
Okay. I don't have it in my printed copy.
In the back.
So that, I'm not going to read all of them. There's the list of positions. You have that. If you refresh your computer, you have that online now. But it's literally all the employees in the district, everybody that works at the district level, no matter what they do, everybody works at the district level. Assistant principals and assistant directors in the schools, because they weren't in that principal calculation. Classroom aides, clerks, secretaries at schools and departments, plant engineers at middle and elementary schools, specialists in district departments, HR, payroll, benefits, paralegal, fans managers, lab managers, groundskeepers, head custodians, network communications specialists, plant engineers, high schools. I mean, it's virtually every employee in the district. Now, some will not get a step because they're only one step off.
Don't your supplements included in that?
No, sir. They're not on a step schedule. They're in a band based on years of experience, and they move automatically when they go from one amount of years experience into the next category.
We've got these money we're going to spend to make sure that they're not so far behind on our step increases they're behind.
Yes, sir.
So it would be better to not take that 3.3 and put it there instead of leaving it where it's at.
What we're recommending is that you utilize 3.34 to address those salary inequities, but also to put 3.3 towards the general fund. This step gets us not quite halfway, but adding 3.3 wouldn't get us all the way there. This gets us to a good break point, a logical way to do it, a way I think we can easily explain to employees about how we did it. You saw the little chart about if you're this far off, you get this step increase. At this time, we believe it's better to portion this money out in three parts: teacher pay, internal inequity, and reduce reliance on fund balance.
How much did these step increases cost?
Total
Total?
3.34 million.
I was looking at the teachers that have gone to other school districts, and
Yes,
I
sir.
noticed we had over 100 that went to other school districts. And I wish there was a way that we could know the reason that they left.
We would know for some of them. I don't know that we could tell you in here tonight, but we asked them. Some of them, they move. Some of them more convenient for a variety of reasons.
Some areas, I'm sure the cost of living is better than what we have here in this school district. But I'd also like to know how much the more money that we give in, how much that might help. But I don't think we can get that. Now, I just wonder about that.
Yes, sir.
100's really not that many when you look at the number of teachers we have.
No, sir, we have 5,900 teachers, somewhere along in there, between 5,900 and 6,000.
I can understand those are going in private schools. We have more than that, I think, than you going private, but I can understand that. It's just a different environment. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Doolin.
I'd like to rewind a little bit back to 2 weeks ago when we were approving the budget, and we were asked to look at the Senate version because it was a lesser amount, and we didn't want to assume that we were going to get more money from the state than we actually were allotted. And 2 weeks ago, we were asked to raise taxes to cover the difference. And now that we've been given the higher amount, I don't know why we're not having a discussion about rescinding the tax increase. And then there's also an extra $3 million, which could be spent for more teacher raises or to address the inequities if you feel like that's really important, or to contribute back to fund balance, which I think is what you said 2 weeks ago that is what you would recommend doing. So really, I just wonder why that, if these other things were so important, why were they not in this huge budget that we talked about for a long time, and they're just only coming up right now at the last minute?
They were in our budget preparation. We removed them when it appeared to us that there would not be the state revenue, nor with a reasonable millage increase they could be addressed. We would have increased teacher salary more. We would have, and I think we mentioned that in the work session when we talked about dealing with the inequity with principals. We said we also have internal inequities with all of our other salary schedules. We don't believe we have the funds at this time to address that. We had our estimation 2 weeks ago we would have been fortunate to have picked up $2 or $3 million, and probably in that case we would have recommended it go to fund balance. Or we might have recommended, based on the actions we saw this past week, that it go to teacher salary. But had we been able to accurately project this, we would have shared it with you 2 weeks ago. But we're always going to give you the most conservative revenue number that exists, because we don't want to put out to the public, we're going to do something, and then the revenue go down, and you have to undo a commitment made in that budget process. We're always going to be a little more liberal in our expenditure projections, and we're going to be very conservative in our revenue projections. And I don't think anybody predicted this coming. It's highly unusual. It's unusual in the first place that the Senate version be less than the House version. That's contrary to probably 20 plus years of history. And normally, the Senate version prevails, whatever it is. It's also, I don't know of another case where they have changed any calculations. Because again, we're using a formula that was developed in 1977. We went in and took calculations from one side's budget and the number from the other side's. So obviously, we'd rather not be here tonight doing this. We'd rather have done this 2 weeks ago in the general fund budget. But we could not accurately project that at that time, and I believe it would have been a disservice to the board for us to have tried to do so.
Well, had we known what the amount would have been, we could have approved the entire budget as presented without a tax increase at all and still had $3 million more to decide what to do with.
Or we may have presented you the budget that you got and it had additional things in it, and we still might have recommended a modest tax increase. But the reason this wasn't in the original budget is we didn't believe it could be achieved through state revenue and a modest tax increase.
Well, excuse me, I think I don't really have another choice except to offer a substitute motion to rescind the tax increase. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to amend the fiscal year 23 general fund budget as presented. What is your substitute motion?
To rescind the most recent millage increase as it's no longer needed to meet the budget requirements as presented for
To rescind the...
To rescind the most recent millage increase as it is no longer needed to meet the budget requirements as presented for 2022-2023.
Read it back to you. To rescind the most recent millage increase as it is no longer needed to meet the budget requirement as presented for fiscal year 22-23. Is that correct? Okay, Ms. Doolin has made a substitute motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it, just for some discussion.
We have a motion and a second by Ms. Leventis Wells. Do you want to follow up on it, Ms. Doolin? Do you want to say any more about it?
No, only that after, I think we should have discussion of where the remaining $3 million would be spent.
Want to discuss that now?
I'd love to hear everyone else's ideas.
Okay. Who would like to, Mr. Sailors would like to go first.
Dr. Royster, the millage recommendation that you proposed to us in the earlier budget was a use it or lose it proposition, am I correct?
Yes.
And if we don't use it this year and lose it, there's no guarantee that the state will be able to give us the same level of support in the next year or two, because we have no idea what the economy is going to look like a year from now or the year after. Am I correct?
That's correct. In general terms, we don't ever have any commitment for what the next year might bring from the state. And then you're losing how many mills, Robin?
0.7 was the use or lose, and we're adding 4.5, so the net would be 1.2.
So you actually are losing some. You still have some millage in reserve, but you are losing some.
But the value of the dollar value of what's in the use it or lose it category is how much?
A little under $2 million, right?
Yes, 1.9.
Okay. And again, what does that do to your recommendations for tonight? Does it change anything that you recommend tonight?
If you all were to approve that motion, and that leaves, I believe, 7.1, that leaves 2.9 million, and we would recommend that be applied directly to increase teacher base salary, every cell on the salary schedule, and it would allow that to be increased by how much, Ms. Stack?
400 per cell.
400.
So instead of giving our staff or teachers 500, they would get 400.
Yes, sir. And there would be no addressing the inequities in other positions.
Well, I think that alone tells me that this idea is bad. Thank you.
Ms. Morrison Fair.
Thank you, Mr. Sellers, for bringing that up, because I wanted someone to clarify that for me also, that if we vote for this substitute motion, would that eliminate the other two proposals that the administration has suggested? And the answer to that is yes, we would not have the funds to do that.
That's correct, Ms. Morrison.
Okay, thank you.
Morrison Fair. Anyone else on the substitute motion? Ms. Wells.
I'm glad I brought my notebook back tonight, but I'm furiously looking to find that number again, because I got a little confused following your number and what Mr. Sothers was asking. So we had to use this year or lose, we had total was how much?
5.7 mils.
Okay, so 5.7, if we don't use, if we say no millage increase this year, then we lose the 5.7.
Correct.
Correct, okay. Yeah, so since I don't know if Ms. Bush will point it out if she's going to speak or not, I mean, the thing that we always talk about is that number is calculated, the amount of mills we can collect, which is significant now beyond the 5.7, right? What we can collect is based on them looking at our population projections and inflation.
That inflation was calculated February?
January.
January.
Which I was going to say. So that's really, that number calculation for this year is pretty out of date based on what we're seeing in inflation.
Yeah, based on the months following the issuance of the calculation.
So while I am always appreciative of the fact that we rarely, or I'm not sure we ever in my time on the board have taken the full millage that we could take, and we have lost some because of that, I'm glad that, and I'm appreciative of that. That just shows the conservative nature of how we go about our budgeting process. But I don't think, after the discussion we had about what we want to address that we can't even address with this additional money, I don't see how taking a step back and saying we're going to not take the mills that we put on the table makes any sense for me. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Meek.
Thank you. Ms. LaVentus Wells.
I'm going to defer it to Ms. Stiles, Dr. Stiles first.
You can't defer it, but you want to.
Well, okay, so I'm just going to say I appreciate, I was not at the budget meeting when this was discussed, and I appreciate Mr. Saylors once again bringing this to light. I understand where Ms. Doolin is coming from, Dr. Royster, because we always hate millage increases, and we've been very, I think we've been very concerned when we do vote on them. But knowing that it will make that kind of difference for teachers as well as everyone, I feel it's important that we follow through and we're at a point where we can do this year, and we may not be able to do it next year. And so in order to do it this year, I understand, and I will be in favor of proceeding with what you had suggested. Thank you. And I appreciate Ms. Doolin bringing this to the forefront. Thank you, Ms. Doolin.
Thank you, Ms. LaVentus Wells. Dr. Stiles.
We discussed today in a training workshop that one of our most important jobs as school board members is to raise student achievement. That's a priority for us. And I think that if we're going to meet that goal, then we've got to be competitive, because we've got to hire the best and the brightest. That means we have to pay them for that work. So I feel like this would be a wise use of funds. And also, I've been in the system as a principal for many years. And I'm here to tell you that if you work in this system, you know about those inequities. Whether you're a principal or you're an HVCA worker or you're a custodian, some of us have lived with those inequities. And I think that it is time that we focus on those inequities while we have a chance. And while I would love to rescind that and and not use this monies use this monies to offset. I just can't with a good conscience do that because I don't think it's in the best interest of our students and raising the bar of student performance. So I support this because I believe it will help us to reach our goal of increasing student performance and retaining high-quality employees over time. So I support this.
Thank you, Dr. Stiles. Anyone else? Hearing none. Ms. Stokes, you want to call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, we seem to be talking about the amendment and the other amendment, so could you just clarify what is the motion that is being voted on right now?
The motion on the floor is the substitute motion is to rescind the most recent millage increase as it is no longer needed to meet the budget requirements as presented for fiscal year 22-23 budget.
And just to help me understand, the rescinding of the millage increase would result in us not offering the increases for the salary adjustments that the administration proposed in their original motion. Is that correct?
All her budget is rescinding the millage increase. It doesn't do anything else with the budget.
I think I heard the administration say if we rescind the millage increase that they would only offer a $400 increase for teachers and would not use the funds to cut fund balance and would not use the fund for.
That's what the superintendent said. Yes.
That would be our recommendation.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Stokes, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Bush? No. Mrs. Doolin?
Yes.
Mrs. Leventis Wells?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
No. No.
Mrs. Morrison Fair?
No.
Mrs. Mosley?
No.
Mr. Sailors?
No.
Dr. Stiles?
No.
Mr. Suddeth?
No.
Mrs. Wells?
No.
And Mr. Meek?
No.
1 yes, 10 no.
The motion fails. Next, the item on the agenda goes back to wherever it is, to approve to amend the fiscal year 23 general fund budget as presented. Any further discussion? Mr. Lewis.
Just to clarify, we're now going back to the original motion, which is a $500 increase for teachers, the equity adjustments for non-teaching positions, and a reduction in reliance on fund balance.
That's correct.
Okay.
Ms. Wells.
I guess one question with the earlier conversation around the reliance on the fund balance and the reduction of that, and in the financial model you used to kind of predict where we're going to be. In that, we expect there's some natural growth in that mill value, which is that's what helps us reduce that reliance on fund balance, right? So we're just projecting what we think that mill value increase is going to be, and that's how we're going to make that.
We would hope that it would do that. It may or may not, but we would hope that that's what will occur. It certainly will offset part of it. We think this better positions it to be offset by natural growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And last time we went through this, we did this before over a 4 or 5 year period, but it seems like we were able to kind of, we thought we were going to be 5 years, we went to 3 years.
I think we did it in 3. Isn't that right, Robin?
That was the mill value, it was a higher growth than we expected, and then there was a budget, we got some money from the state.
Right.
Kind of that came out the wheeling.
But we were, to your point, we were able to shorten it from 5 to 3 because of that. And maybe that would happen again. But again, if we can make those a little bit smaller increments, it improves the likelihood that natural growth in the value of the mill will take care of it.
And what's our fund balance right now, our general fund balance?
Saving the answer for that till the end of the meeting.
How about as a percentage?
We're asking you that question earlier in the meeting.
As of April,
The unassigned fund balance is $199,992,727.
And as you know, we'll get, when we close out the books on FY22 and the external auditors certify the end of the year, then we'll have an absolute number. We'll probably bring you a recommendation then as to a spend down on some of that for non-recurring expenditures.
And I think with the plan, it makes sense. We took advantage of ESSER funds and the ability to capture some expenses that we've had in our budget that's allowed us to kind of build this coffer up. It makes sense to use it in this transition, I think. So, okay, thank you. I'm comfortable with that.
Ms. Wells, any further discussion? Ms. Doolin.
I have a quick question about the fund balance also. If there's $3 million going back into the fund balance, that alleviates some of the recurring expenses amount?
No, all it will do is move $3 million from designated fund balance to undesignated.
Okay.
So it would get added to that number that Robin just gave you.
And mid-year, should the need arise for more school resource officers, or if more become available, we couldn't use that money for salaries for officers because then that would turn into recurring.
We prefer to not ever use that for recurring costs. There's still grant money out there. We just had 6 approved. I think we sent you all communication on that. Now, one of the real struggles is, just like with us, difficulty in law enforcement agencies finding enough personnel.
But could it be used for security equipment that was a one-time purchase?
Yes.
Okay.
Be used for anything, basically anything that's a one-time purchase. General fund balance is unrestricted in its use. It can be spent on capital, it can be spent on general fund expenditures.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the original motion is on the floor and it's been moved and seconded to amend the fiscal year 23 general fund budget as presented. Ms. Stokes, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Doolin?
Yes.
Mrs. LaVentus Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mrs. Morrison Fair?
Yes.
Mrs. Mosley?
Yes.
Mr. Sailors?
Yes.
Dr. Stiles?
Yes.
Mr. Sudduth?
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Wells?
Yes.
And Mr. Meek?
Yes.
11 yes and 0 no.
The motion carries. Next item on the agenda is 5.05, Amendment to the Long-Range Facilities Plan Capital Improvement Program. The recommended motion coming from the administration is to waive policy BBC and to approve the amendments to the Long-Range Facilities Plan Capital Improvement Program, the LRFP CIP, as presented. I need a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sailors.
I move for the acceptance of the recommendation.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and second by Ms. Bush. Any questions? Mr. Sudduth.
Dr. Ross, to make sure I understand, on these, we're going to get a demolition project. Is that still for East Gant?
Yes, sir, that was approved earlier on. All this does is move the East Gant site, the Wade Hampton site, and the piece of property we own on Highway 253, actually specifically will name them in our long-range facility plan as property we're holding for future school use. That's all this does.
In the gymnasium at the former Southside High School?
We're going to demo it.
Or demo it?
I believe you already have those contracts let, Colonel Carl. Okay.
And lastly, we're going to add additional seating to Malden High School?
Doesn't have anything to do with that. Doesn't have anything to do with this. That's already, you already approved that. All this does is add those 3 sites to show that we may use them in the future as part of our long-range facility plan. The attachments simply are actions you previously took in the spring.
I'd like to know the stadium capacity of all our high schools.
We can get that to you.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Anyone else have any discussion? Ms. Wells?
To follow on what Coach has said, Dr. Worcester, we can expect a revised full long-range facilities plan with all that sort of information in it when?
Yes, I would expect within the next 10 days, the approvals that you all did in the spring will be folded into the format that we already have, retitled 22-23, and be available not only to you, but to the general public.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, 5.06, Fiscal Education Exemption. The recommended motion from the administration is to approve a physical education exemption for one student at Malden Middle School. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, make a motion to approve physical education exemption for one student at Malden Middle School.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second by Ms. Doolin. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The motion carries. Next item on the agenda is 5.07, Debt Service Budget. The recommended motion from the administration is to approve the fiscal year 23 debt service budget. I need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to approve the fiscal year 23 debt service budget.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Ms. Who was that down here?
Linda Morrison.
Ms. Linda Morrison Fair. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item, 5.08, fiscal year 23 best debt service budget. The recommended motion from the administration is to approve the fiscal year 23 best debt service budget. I need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to approve the fiscal year 23 best debt service budget.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Who said that down here?
Ms. Doolin?
Ms. Doolin. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, 5.09, the fiscal year 23 building fund budget. The recommended motion from the administration is to approve the fiscal year 23 building fund budget. I need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to approve the fiscal year 23 building fund budget.
I have a motion. Is there a second? I have a motion and a second by Ms. Bush. I heard that. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is 5.10, fiscal year 2023 food and nutrition services budget. The recommended motion from the administration is to approve the fiscal year 23 food and nutrition services budget. Mr. Lewis.
Make a motion to approve the FY23 food and nutrition services budget.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Ms. Leventis Welch.
Mr. Chairman,
That's because I love to eat.
I have a
Mr. Lewis, you have the floor.
I just have some questions for Mr. Urban. I have some questions. So first, can you talk a little bit about the full paid lunch price that we're expecting for this coming fiscal year?
Come up here.
Is that on?
Yep.
We're recommending that we maintain the $2.50 paid price. This would be the 6th year in a row that we had that full paid lunch price.
I just think that is really incredible. So for 6 consecutive years, families are paying the same rate for a meal, regardless of all the inflationary expenses that we're seeing both in your program and increasing salaries for our employees, and we're still able to keep it at $2.50. That is just really incredible, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you.
The other more important question is, as my son moves from elementary school to middle school, what are his expectations for the meals that will be provided at Hughes Academy?
I think the first expectation would be that his parents fund his account fully. You're in for a big surprise next year, sir.
Does the food truck make it to Hughes? Because I see it in many other places, but I never see them actually make it to.
It gets around.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Irvin.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Any further discussion? Ms. Leventis Wells.
I would just like to say, you are known throughout the state. Everybody wants you, and you better never leave us. So thank you for all you're doing for our children and for everyone in Greenville County. Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis Wells. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, 5.11, the special revenue budgets fiscal year 23. The recommended motion from the administration is to accept the fiscal year 23 special revenues budget. Do I hear a motion?
Have a motion.
Mr. Sutton.
23 special revenue budget.
We have a motion.
I'll second that.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Leventis Wells, second. You have to wait to ask you. You have to wait to ask you.
I'm sorry, I was.
Any discussion on the special revenue budgets? Ms. Wells?
Slow y'all down a little bit, because I wanted to ask something on the building fund, and y'all went right past me, so I'm gonna ask a question. So in this budget, these are all the monies that come to us with strings attached.
Yes.
And have we been given any latitude for any of them that would be worth noting?
No, what you'll note, I assume they're also highlighted in your online version, the ones that are zeroed out. Now, we now have latitude with those because they're gone. They got rolled into the general fund state revenue, which you've now used as part of your general fund budget.
Yeah, and remind me, that amount was something like 40. Because I looked that we talked.
Let's see, one of them was 104 positions. I don't remember the dollar amount. What were the two amounts, Robin?
Totally, you're looking at about 30 million for the three funds that were rolled into this new funding formula.
And to my knowledge, there are no significant changes in the rules on any of the rest of the programs.
No, I didn't see any significant. I mean,
Dollar amounts are reasonably the same too.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Any further questions on the special revenue budget? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is 5.12, and the officer election item was left off of the agenda tonight, and so Ms. Bush has a motion.
Yes, I move to add 5.12, election of officers to the agenda in accordance with board policy BCBD to meet the exigent time voting requirement and board policy BBAA.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by
Mosley. Go ahead.
Ms. Mosley. Okay, any discussion?
Consent?
Excuse me?
Do you need unanimous consent?
No. We're getting 2/3 of, if we can get 2/3. Okay. Call the roll, Ms. Stokes.
Make it legal.
That's right.
All right. Mrs. Bush?
Yes.
Mrs. Doolin?
Yes.
Mrs. Leventis Wells?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mrs. Morrison Fair?
Yes.
Mrs. Mosley?
Yes.
Mr. Sailors?
Pass.
Dr. Stiles?
Yes.
Mr. Sutton?
Absolutely.
Mrs. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Sailors?
Yes.
And Mr. Meek?
Yes.
Be 11 yes and
Okay, so
0
we
no's.
got 2/3 at least, so
At least.
the item is on the agenda. election of 4 officers of the board. The first officer, we have to do it by show of hands. Chair is Roger Meek. Raise your hand, please, or not. All those in favor? All those opposed, raise your right hand.
I'm sorry.
11-0. A lot better than last year, I tell you. The motion, the chair is Roger Meek. Next one is vice chair. The nomination is for Debbie Bush. Please raise your right hand. All in favor? All opposed, raise your right hand. Passes 11-0. Congratulations, Ms. Bush. You're vice chair again. The next is the secretary for Dr. Carolyn Stiles. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, raise your right hand.
I think we're getting a little slap happy.
Motion carries. Okay, thank you all very much for your support for this coming year. I'm sure we'll have some interesting moments. The next item on the agenda is for information only, he thinks, and that is 6.01. Dr. Royster.
We don't have a presentation, Mr. Meek. You'll find the summaries of the audits attached that Mr. Owen and his staff have completed to this date. You'll see their findings, the management response, and certainly if you have any question, we'll answer that for you.
Thank you. Mr. Owens, would you raise your right hand? Now, he's out there for everyone. He's really wanting some questions. He told me earlier that he needed some questions. It's the first time we have had the opportunity to ask him any questions. So who would like to ask Mr. Owens for a question? Ms. Doolin.
It'll take me a minute to find my spot. As I was reading this report, there was something about some equipment on some vehicles that was missing or misplaced, and I wondered if they were actually just misplaced or if there was a bad system for tracking them.
More the latter rather than the former. Right, Mr. Owen, that your finding was the system was inadequate to track them.
Yes, I think it would be difficult to pinpoint exactly what happened to them. A lot of them were smaller items, and based on how they were being tracked, it's hard to identify at what point, or if they got old and just phased out and were never removed. So it's difficult to say just based on the audit.
Well, is it items like a tool bag, or is it like spare tires, or?
No, it would be things like a skill saw, power drill, be things like that. I mean, there are all kind of tools on our maintenance vehicles.
Is there a recommendation for another system or something?
Yes, I send it. You'll find that in the management response.
Oh.
We're doing a Six Sigma review to evaluate our current procedures, and then they'll seek a software that'll handle it. What they try to do is take School Dude software, which is the maintenance work order management software we use, and use it for a purpose for which it wasn't intended, and it didn't work well doing that. What's probably the greater deterrent to loss is the fact that we actually spot check the vehicles to see what's on them. But they're looking to replace the system using one that's designed for inventory purposes.
Obviously, it's not the biggest deal in the world if a skill saw has been put in one truck instead of a different one, unless you need it in your truck. But
well, we just want to make sure it doesn't walk off completely.
right.
Yeah.
So if there are things that are extremely valuable, would it make sense to have like a GPS tag on them so
They're actually tracked differently.
There's serial numbers on most of the items. Items over a certain dollar threshold are tracked differently. They're inside an actual inventory system in Lawson versus, tracked internally with a spreadsheet or something like that.
This was basically for small tools that are routinely carried on the maintenance trucks.
Okay. Just the report made it sound like there was just every tool for himself out there.
No, it's just we don't have a good system for tracking it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. Anyone else have any questions? Hearing none. Mr. Owens, you got off real easy tonight. We'll get you next time. The next item on the agenda is a committee liaison reports. Do we have any committee or liaison reports? Mr. Lewis, were you going to? No? Okay. I'm sorry. Dr. Stiles, did you want to report on your committee tonight?
Yes, today our ad hoc committee met for our board self-assessment, and we had some great conversation and dialogue, and one of our goals is just to better serve our constituents and our employees. And so we reviewed a lot of research on how we can be more effective, and that's just our step one. And we'll be moving forward, taking the knowledge and insights that we learned and how to be more effective, and we'll be creating a new instrument in the future that's going to guide us to being a top-performing school board.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
Sorry, I forgot why you were calling on me, but now I understand. I'm sorry.
And I'm the old one on here.
The advocacy committee wasn't able to meet, but we do have a couple of updates on a few bills that we're moving through, and I was wondering if Ms. Horton could just give us a brief update on the voucher bill that worked its way through most of the House and Senate.
That was S935, and it went through the House and the Senate. It went to a conference committee, and a conference report came out, and the House accepted that conference report. However, in the very last hour of the very last day that the General Assembly was working, the Senate allowed it, that they adjourned without passing it. So it's dead for the year.
And so it is dead and would have to be refiled in December for the next
Correct.
2 years.
Yeah, they'll start doing pre-files in November or December.
Okay.
And I fully expect there'll be another bill filed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Ms. Wales?
Well, I have a question sort of related to advocacy first. So I was surprised when I went to my primary, for the first primary to vote, and there was a question on the ballot related to making school board races partisan. And that was the first I had seen or heard. So I guess for my benefit, do we know how that came to be on the ballot and how it came to be on the ballot in such a biased way?
How that happens is that the party puts together advisory questions. They are advisory questions. I will say they're often worded in a way to elicit a particular vote.
Biased, yes. Okay. So that was just all, and so there's no vetting of that by the election commission when they put?
Within the party.
Interesting, okay.
To clarify, it is a non-binding question, so it is a question to collect input, but it doesn't direct any entity to do anything.
No, they call it an advisory question, and they had 3 of those that were written in a way somewhat leading.
Yes, okay, that's curious.
Okay. Go ahead.
And then, so just from a committee report standpoint, so I will be chairing the committee to look at the superintendent's evaluation tool, the instrument that we use for that. So I've asked the superintendent to provide some feedback and maybe some best tools he's seen from some of his counterparts. But in addition to that, there was some conversation about that tool and its use, and didn't like it cumbersome, easy. So if in the next 2 weeks, any board members would like to provide that feedback to me, and you can just send it to Nancy, and what you would like to see out of that's the same or different than the current tool that we're using, that will help when the committee meets so that we can use that sort of as a starting point for what we put together then.
Thank you, Ms. Wells, and thank you for chairing that committee. Mr. Lewis, are you finished?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Sailors, you want to say
I've got a question related to advocacy, if I could, please.
Sure.
To your point, Julie, it's an advisory question on the ballot, but 2 of the 3 were directly connected to school boards And I've heard from at least 3 members of the Republican caucus that they're going to be introducing bills next year for that. Have you heard anything of that regard?
Well, it's been tried before, and the 3 questions, one related to lawsuits and
Right.
share, one related to partisan elections for school board, and one related to closing primaries for
Right.
all races. Bills to those points have been introduced before, so I'm sure that they will probably come up next year.
Okay. And to Mrs. Wells' comment about not hearing about this, I'll be honest with you, I'm bothered greatly by that. Because although the School Board Association shouldn't get in the middle of a partisan conversation, for you not to have been briefed by that association as to what's going on is problematic to me. And I think you should share that with the staff leadership at your earliest convenience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Ms. LaVentus Wells.
I think that that was written to be so confusing to people. I mean, you had to read it and then reread it and then read it again. So I think the way it was written was extremely confusing to most people who were not really knowing that that was going to be on the ballot. I just think I really do believe that. I mean, I knew it, but I read it 4 times before I even got there so that I fully understood it. But there were people that said, what did that mean? I went, well, what did you put? And then when they told me, I said, so you voted this way for it? And they said, well, that's not what I thought it was. So I think it was written to be very confusing. And it was. It worked. It worked.
Thank you, Ms. LaVentus Wells. Anyone else have any comments? Okay, hearing none. Next item on the agenda is 8.01. Dr. Oyster, monthly financial statement.
I don't think Ms. Stack has a presentation. Be glad to answer any question you might have. We're equally as happy to conclude and go home.
Do we have any questions? Hearing none. Before I offer to get a motion, some of you, or most of you up here knows that Miss Sherry Stokes will not be our recorder in the future, except on some rare occasions. I want to read a little bit for her, some things that we have got. Sherry graduated from Blue Ridge High School in May of 1980 and joined Greenville County Schools in December 1980 as secretary in the operations department. She supported the director of operations and director of fiscal properties. If I say something wrong, it wasn't me. Somebody else gave me this. But she moved to the district office in 1989 as secretary, board recorder. 33 years as board recorder and 42 years with the district. She moved in 2010 to assist in the processing center on a part-time basis and then joined the academics department in 2012, where she supports Dr. McDavid, Jeff McCoy, and others within the department. Sherry is transitioning out of the board recorder duties as she is needed full-time in the academics department. So while she will continue to serve as a substitute board recorder, tonight is her last board meeting. In this role, she has performed so ably for the past 3 decades. Ms. Stokes. Now, Ms. Stokes, do you want to say anything? You don't usually get to say anything.
Turn your mic on.
We had all that great stuff down, but who recorded that? How great that we think it's
Oh, thank you. No. If I can get through this. Thank you for allowing me to be your board recorder. I was never good at this. Never good at this. I've truly enjoyed my time, in this position. And I've spent a lot of time with a lot of you. And I appreciate your friendships and your support over the years. And I'll be downstairs. So if you need me, but thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all the
Thank you,
kind
Ms.
words you
Stokes.
said, Mr. Reed.
It's a pleasure, so. Okay, now I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Have a motion and a second.
Yeah, we
Hold
get
on a minute. Motion made, Ms. Leventis Wells. Who did the second? Ms. Mosley over there. All in favor of the motion, say aye. All opposed, say no. Motion carries.
Does Sherry want a picture with all of the board
Yeah, go ahead,
members?
Sherry.
Okay, before y'all leave.
How about we stand up?